today to talk to you about harvesting Japanese knotweed. So this is Japanese knotweed. It's an invasive and it is really edible. A lot of people like to compare it to asparagus, but it's actually much more similar and much more closely related to rhubarb. So it's in that same family. This time of year you can recognize it by its speckled stems and these leaves that are just starting to come off or come out on the top. And let's see if I can do this. By last year's growth. So it's got these old canes here that have really strong joints, and they're a great way to spot a patch from a distance. So a couple notes about how to find a good place to harvest. You can see behind me there is a road here. So I'm going to be collecting from the very back edge of this patch, the furthest side away from the road. Normally I would not suggest not collecting near a road at all, but this is a very lightly traveled gravel road that leads to just a couple of houses. So I feel pretty safe collecting, but I'm not going to collect that stuff right on the edge of the road, even though it looks delicious and perfect. So another thing, May 5th, today is a little late in the Japanese knotweed harvesting season. So a lot of plants you see are already 3 feet tall with big leaves, and at that point they're a little tougher than is useful for a lot of the things you want to make out of them. So where I am doesn't really seem to be not exposed or shaded at all, right? All the trees are still not leafed out, but I'm just about kind of in the middle western side of Durham. So I have on one side of me the Blue Hills, Reed's Gap, where Tilcon is, and on the other side of me is Bear Rock and Mount Pisgah. So this area actually sees a little bit less sun in the morning, the sun rises a little bit later, and the sun sets a little bit earlier. So the plants here are a little shorter. And they're absolutely perfect. Here's a great looking cluster where you can really see what they look like. Now, I like to cut them pretty low with a pocket knife. Normally I do use a hand to stabilize. And then I like to collect them into plastic because much like rhubarb, they do kind of ooze a little bit of a liquid, so in a fabric bag or a basket they'll just leak out. You can use hand clippers if you'd like. That works just totally well too. Yeah, so that's what they look like inside. They're real fleshy. This beautiful pink color that you see in the speckles on the stems and here on this little papery membrane really comes through when you make a lot of stuff out of it. So I'm excited to show you that later. So what is Japanese knotweed and why should we harvest it? So Japanese knotweed is an invasive plant in the Polygonaceae family. This is commonly known as the buckwheat family, and it is the family, of course, that buckwheat is in, but also rhubarb and the docks and a lot of plants that are eaten around the world. So Japanese knotweed was brought to the Americas in the 1800s, I believe, primarily for horticultural use, but in its native range, it is widely eaten and also used medicinally. It's definitely a plant if you're interested in herbal medicine and have a trusted and knowledgeable herbalist, you should definitely ask them about it. So it's invasive because it comes into areas where it is not planted very, very easily. It has wind-dispersed seeds that just blow all over the place. You can especially see this in the way that it becomes dominant along highways where the wind of vehicles kind of whips it along down the road. And then once it's there, it grows really densely, really quickly, and just totally outcompetes the native species by shading them. You can see here, it's actually successfully shading out mugwort, which is one of our most aggressive invasives. And what happens when this happens is that all of our native insect and bird species that rely on the vibrant, diverse ecosystem that's usually here and all of the many plants, they don't have enough resources here to be able to live here. Some honeybees, of course, will love the flowers and even some of our native generalist bees and wasps and flies, but as far as habitat value, it's basically zero. So it's a great edible plant. I find it pairs better with sweet flavors than savory, but lots of people like to make pickles or treat it kind of like asparagus or green beans. I personally today am going to be making some wine and also a liqueur, and possibly playing around with a pie. But to be honest, I'm not really the biggest fan of rhubarb, so I'm sure someone who loves rhubarb is going to love this. Hi, welcome to the kitchen. So I've prepped all of the pieces of knotweed that we harvested by removing all of the leaves, and then I've cut them, and for these, which will become a crisp, I've added the juice of 1 lemon, a little bit of flour, a little bit of sugar, and a little bit of salt. And for the topping, this is just regular flour with oatmeal, butter, sugar, a little bit of salt, nutmeg, and that's it. And I'm also going to be making some of the tougher pieces. Down here. I've cut them and they're boiling away and will become a syrup. I'll be adding sugar to that, and then I'll be using that to make a liqueur. So knotweed is pretty high in oxalates, so if you're sensitive to stuff like spinach or rhubarb, you might have a sensitivity to this too, and most people do prefer it cooked for that reason as well. Happy cooking! Welcome back! It's been about 45 minutes, and the crisp is out of the oven. So we baked it until it was a nice golden brown on top. And for most of that time, about 35 minutes, the knotweed is boiling away in some sugar water. So I put the sugar in after about 15 minutes, and then I'm filtering it through a mesh strainer and then some cheesecloth. And as you can see, it becomes this lovely light pink, kind of peachy color. Now I've cleaned and prepped some of the larger stems, and they're condensating in here because they've already been in the freezer, and that's where they're going. I'm going to be using these pretty short term, but don't forget to label and date when you put in the freezer. Alright, enjoy this natural, delicious bounty.